Now that we know how you can write code in Solidity and how to read smart contracts, let's have a look at the ABI, the menu of a smart contract. So let's actually go back for a second into the Remix playground to have a look again at the smart contract we wrote. So this is the contract we coded in the last video, and we were able to perform some actions within the Remix interface. However, how can how other computer programs can actually use this contract and trigger the actions that we were playing with in the last video? Well, there's something I wanted to show you in the compilation tab, where below the compile options, what you can see are different possibilities so that we can publish it on IPFS, more on IPFS later, Swarm, or we can actually see all the compilation details of our entire contract. So if I will click on it, you can see that I have a toggle here called ABI. And if I will open it up, there are 3 elements to it. If I'll open it up, you can see that I have here something called surge number. And if you remember, this is actually our function that we coded. We have number 1, which is our constructor that defines the value for the number variable, and also 2, which defines the getNumber function. It also defines the inputs. So if we'll open it up, it's a bit nested. You can see that it takes a Boolean called allowed, and we also have the outputs. So in this case, we can see that it returns an unsigned integer back. Okay, but what is that and why am I showing this to you? Let's go back to the slides. In order to understand what ABI is, we need to go back to the Web2 world for a second and speak about APIs. API is an application programming interface, which is a solution for the computers, for the devices to communicate with each other. And it's something that is really easy to read for us, for the developers building the code. However, it doesn't really explain too much. What do I mean by that? Basically, imagine that you are in a restaurant and you receive a menu with a list of different dishes. When the waiter comes, you can give the waiter your order and say that you want to eat spaghetti bolognese today. What happens then is that the waiter takes that order to the kitchen behind closed doors, and the chef is preparing your dish. The problem is, though, that you don't know what exactly is he doing, which ingredients he uses, how much time does it take for each step of the specific action. And then when the dish is ready, the waiter brings it back to you. And this is exactly what an API is, without going into the code details. It allows one computer program to make an order to another computer program. So let's say I would like to receive this information. When the other computer program receives it, you don't really know how that program is getting that information, what is happening behind the scenes, but then it gives you back exactly what you asked for. The problem is here that it's difficult to build code, and it's difficult to have transparency and to trust other players in the network if we don't know what is going on. But to understand it better in terms of code, let's have a look at the GitHub API and see how it's built. Let's start with an empty tab in the browser where we don't have anything. And in order to communicate with another computer program, we will use the API. In order to do that, I will send a request to a specific URL, if you remember the client-server communication. So let me paste that, which is the endpoint, so an address that GitHub API is using. And when I hit enter, what I will get back is a document with some code. And what I will actually get back in the first place, if you will try to use it yourself, will be a raw version without any syntax coloring, which is pretty difficult to use. So I would really recommend you to install a JSON viewer extension, which is available for Chrome, for Firefox, and all the other browsers, which then allows me to click on this icon again and view the data that I got back in a nicer way. Okay, but what is it? The address that I entered here is a function. Basically, it's an address that is taken care of by a function in the API that will give me all the information, or the information defined by the API for a specific user of the GitHub platform. In this case, it's Juliet. And what you can see here is I get an object, so object enclosed in the curly braces, with a name of an element and its corresponding value. So you can see that Juliet's login is Juliet Tech 13. We can also have a look at her avatar, so you can see the URL of that avatar. If I'll click on it, it opens actual image. The other information that you can see here is, for example, the URL for her subscriptions. It's also her username, the companies that she's working for. Okay, but why do we actually need that information? This is a written information written into code that later on can be actually reused in a real interface and displayed in a nice way. So if we will have a look at Juliet's profile on the actual GitHub interface, so we are on github.com/, and what you can see here is the avatar that we just saw in that piece of information we got back. We can also see the username that was listed there. So you can think of an API as that menu where we say, okay, so I would like to receive all the information that I can about Juliet so that later on I can display that. The problem here is that I don't know how the server provided me with that information. How do we solve that problem when we don't know what is happening behind the scenes? Well, ABI and API may actually sound familiar because ABI is the solution that is used in Web3 to provide you with all the details about what a smart contract is actually doing behind the scenes. Application binary interface. It is an interface between two programs which communicate through the binary representation of code, so compiled code. And for us users, it's difficult to read because what I showed you on Remix was already a transformed version of an ABI that is easy to read for us. And there are also many other tools that will help you to read ABI and understand what the contract is doing and what is happening in each function, what should be returned, what each function takes as an input as well. Going back to our restaurant analogy, right now, what we start with is a menu, which actually gives you more information about the dish itself because it gives you a recipe and it gives you all the steps that have to be performed, all the ingredients for the dish as well. So when the waiter takes your order and it takes them then to the kitchen, you can see the chef preparing your dish and you can oversee kind of or understand the entire process. And then again, the dish comes back to you. So to understand how it works, or maybe to see the ABI itself, let's have a look on Etherscan. We will have a look at the CryptoKitties token ABI. So this token is actually based on a smart contract. We'll talk about this later on. But for now, let's focus on the application binary interface. As you can see, we are currently in the contract tab where before we saw the code of the smart contract. But if we will scroll down, what we can find is the contract ABI. And as you can see, it's not an easily readable piece of information, but it contains all the details that we need to have to understand how the smart contract works. But as you can see, the logic is not stored here. It's kind of like a list of shortcuts for what different variables are, for what different functions are, what do they need to work, so what the input is, what do they return back, so what the output is. And what we can do, let's scroll a bit down. There is a function that is defined in this bit of code. As you can see, it starts with curly braces and ends with curly braces, and its name is withdraw balance. Also, I can actually see that it's a function through the type key here, which tells me that withdraw balance is a function. So what can we do now? Let me copy this with Control C on my keyboard, which you can't really see. And for using Control F, I can actually find the withdraw balance. Basically, Control F allows you to find any keyword on a website that you're looking for. And what we have here is the source code of the smart contract with the exact definition of the function. So what we can do now is to read through it and try to understand what it's doing, and also definitely use the comments added by the creators of the code who try to help us understand what is happening here. So this is a withdraw balance function, which is external, so can be used externally, and also has another keyword here, which says only CFO. And luckily, we have a comment above that says that only the CFO can capture the balance available to that particular contract. What is happening in the function body is that we define a balance variable, which will be an unsigned integer, and we assign the existing balance of the contract. Whenever you see this, it refers to the contract scope itself. And then we have another comment which says subtract all the currently pregnant kittens we have plus 1 of margin. And as you can see, we have a computation here which is then stored in a subtract fees variable. What comes next is something we already know as well, which is a conditional if statement that says that if the balance is bigger than the variable that we have just defined, then the contract will send the difference between them to the CFO address or by the CFO address. And this is exactly how you can go through ABI. And you need it to understand what a specific transaction will, for example, do. Because within the transaction, what you will find is information about which function from a smart contract will be used, which function will be called. So what you can do there is find the contract by getting the contract name or contract address, have a look at the ABI to see the general overview of a specific function, and then you can actually go into the details of the code to have a look how the chef is preparing your dish behind the scenes.